So hello, everyone. I believe the keynote speech is wrapping up and we should have more of our participants and our attendees join us shortly. So we're just going to wait for 2 more minutes and then we'll start our session for today.
Hi, Rishi.
Yeah, hi, Sudhir. Good afternoon.
Okay, so let's begin. Welcome to the Republic of Letters Groundbreak 2020. This is the first time all the educators of leading educators of India have come together to talk about how to promote education, especially in an extremely unprecedented crisis situation like we are experiencing right now. I am Shuha Gangopadhyay. I am a curriculum specialist with Harappa Education, and I will be your host over the course of this conference for this particular track, which is the track that is going to be talking about leading from the front. And it is a little bit of a special track because we have specifically invited certain individuals who are leading institutions and educational organizations in India to attend and participate in the discussions and sessions that we have planned. So currently we have 3 parallel tracks that are taking place. The first one is on transitioning to digital. The second one is the resilient institution. And the third one, of course, is leading from the front. So we are going to start 2 other sessions as well in tracks 1 and 2. The first one is pedagogy, past, present, and future. And the second one is how institutions are responding a global perspective. And if any of you want to attend any of these sessions, please feel free to do so. You will find the links available to you on the chat box. I think my colleague Naman has just posted the links on the chat box. So please feel free to make and if and when you want to come back to track 3, please ensure that you remember your password that has been shared with you earlier. The password is 2020. Every time you come to track 3, you will be required to key in this password. So that's it with the housekeeping matters for today. Let's quickly make our way to introducing our wonderful panel for the session. For the first session, kicking off track 3 in the Republic of Letters today, we have chairing this session, which is on leadership for sustained excellence. We have Professor Rishikesha Krishnan, and the speakers for this panel are going to be Dr. Sudhir Krishnaswamy and Professor Devang Khakkar. Professors Krishnan, Dr. Krishnaswamy and Professor Khakkar, thank you so much for taking time out from your schedules. I can imagine how busy all of you must be, but thank you so much for joining us for the session in the afternoon. And just quickly, I want to introduce each of our panelists as well. So Professor Krishnan is currently the Director Designate at IIM Bangalore, and he has been the former Director at IIM Indore. He's also a board member of the HEFA, and he's the author of 2 books on innovation. Welcome, Professor Krishnan. Dr. Krishna Swamy is currently the Vice Chancellor at the National Law School of India University. He's also the co-founder and trustee for the Center for Law and Policy Research. He himself is also an author and holds a DPhil from the University of Oxford. And finally, coming to Professor Khakkar, he is a professor in the Department of Chemical Engineering at IIT Bombay. And what's incredible about him is he is, in fact, he's been the director for IIT Bombay for 2 consecutive terms. He's also a Bhatnagar Prize winner and he holds a PhD from the University of Massachusetts. So thank you all so much. And this is where I am going to now take your leave and hand it over to Professor Krishnan.
Thank you very much, Shubha. Welcome to all both the panelists as well as everyone who has joined us for this session. So let me first give you a very brief background to what we hope to cover in this particular session. So we have in India several institutions which have attained very high standards over time, but there is also a challenge of sustaining the excellence you have achieved in the past. For example, the 5 IITs which were started in the late 50s and early 60s, they in a sense had pole position. But over the last few years, we have seen that some IITs seem to be doing maybe a little bit better than the others. And there's the challenge of how do you maintain position or how do you sustain the kind of excellence you have achieved in the past. Similarly, if you take law schools, Sudhir is from the National Law School of India University here in Bangalore, which was the first national law school set up. Again, in a way, it had the advantage of being the first mover. But what has been impressive about NLSIU Bangalore is that it has continued to remain at the #1 position now for several years, practically since its inception. So my focus or intended focus in this panel is to understand what is the role of leadership in sustaining this excellence. What are the kind of challenges you face once you're already at the top, and how do you keep the institution there? So I'm going to start, if you don't mind, by talking to Devang. So Devang, this is my personal view, so of course you can disagree with this, but when I look back at IIT Bombay, for example, it looks to me that it sort of came unambiguously to the top maybe about 15 years ago when Ashok Mishra was the director. That's the time you saw, for example, in the last 10 years, we've seen systematically in the top 100, maybe 75 to 80 students in the top 100 of JEE joining IIT Bombay, which at least for the public is one important indicator of how well IIT Bombay is doing. And of course, all the rankings and all the rest. So could you first, give us a little bit of your perspective of how did IIT Bombay make that jump to become the kind of favorite institute? And then what do you think the institute has done after that to sustain that? I think you're on mute, Devang, so you'll have to unmute.
Okay. So I agree with you that, IIT Bombay came to the forefront around 15 years ago, and but the foundation for that was laid maybe another 15 years before that. And I think this is the nature of educational institutions, because you have to invest and then wait. And I would say that it was in actually the late 80s where the change really took place. And there was tremendous recruitment that took place then. And the leadership was very active in trying to attract the best people they could to the institute. This was also a time of great financial difficulty for the institute, but despite that, they used whatever, inducements they could find, whatever they had at their hand, and just persuasion to get the best people to join. And, I think this continued. And we actually had, before Ashok Mishra, two directors who made a huge impact in laying this foundation. Professor Nag, who was very active in recruitment, and I think that is really at the heart of maintaining excellence, being able to recruit the right kind of people into the institute. And then Professor Sukhatme, who was, of course, from the institute itself and a very accomplished academic. He, under the guidance of Professor Kelkar, who came from, so he had actually been deputy director under Kelkar, and then he became director. So he actually strengthened the academic foundations in terms of, how the system functions. And I think these things paid off. And during Professor Mishra's time, the institute just completely opened up. We opened ourselves to industry, to institutions, uh, international institutions within India. For example, for the first time in his tenure, we actually signed an MOU with an Indian university, which was the Institute of Science. And I think that, that really, I mean, by then the foundation had been laid. There were really many excellent faculty on board. And so, and then things really moved. So I would say that yes, but that it has continued to, even after, during Professor Mishra's time and after that, it continued to do better and better. Again, I feel that several things have been put in place, and but I think during my tenure also there was a lot of recruitment that took place, a lot of broadening of the scope of our offerings. We had many new programs that started and so forth, and I think that made it very attractive to students. So if I sort of speak a little bit in general, one general thing that I've said is that faculty recruitment is really key to excellence in an academic institution, because they are really at the core of everything that goes on inside an academic institution. So how do you manage to recruit the best faculty and create conditions so that they can actually flourish? And it's only if good people join and they do well that you will be able to attract more good people. If good people join and they're not able to do anything, then that's really a bad advertisement. So I think this is one of the key elements. And the second thing is really a little bit more subtle. And this is something that I always felt very strongly. Uh, it's really very easy to come up with incentives or sanctions to try and achieve certain metrics. And I know that even in a place like I am Bangalore, you actually get money for publishing in a good journal. And, you will get, once you put an incentive like this, you are going to achieve that. These institutions are full of very smart people. So the minute you put down an incentive like this, you are going to increase the number of your papers in the journals that you decide are very good. But often that is, you've kind of lost the battle once you do that. And I think it's not that you don't want people to publish in good journals, but I think that equally important is why are they doing the research and why do they want to publish in those journals? I mean, the motivation for doing that should be very clear. And when you introduce other incentives, sometimes you lose that, and so something from the core disappears. So really, I feel that.
So Devang, sorry to interrupt you, Devang. Yeah.
I'll just say one more thing.
Sure.
One more thing, that instead of incentives, instead of sanctions and so forth, I think it's a more difficult thing to do, but it's important to sort of generate a culture in which we just try and do a little better each time, and encourage good work in a subtle way, but not have very strong incentives and sanctions. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, Sudhir, if I can turn to you now, could you tell us a little bit about what role leadership has played in bringing National Law School Bangalore to the position it has today, to the eminent position it has today?
Thanks, Rishi, for having me here. And I want to pick up on some themes that I think Devang already outlined, which was to try and give a sense of what institutional culture is built around. And I suppose that in terms of leadership of these institutions, the national law universities, they've tended to be quite director or vice chancellor centric. And a National Law School was lucky that it for the first 2 decades, first 20 out of roughly 30 years of its existence, it has had founder directors, by which I mean that it was the founding faculty team that led the institution. And I suppose that founding faculty cohort had internalized many of the values of what was meant to be done with the national law universities. And so without ever capturing discreetly in any document, or for that matter in strong institutional practices, just by the fact that founding faculty led the institution for the first 20 years, I think National Law School benefited significantly. I wish I could point to the kinds of institutional practices that Devang mentioned, but unfortunately these have been, if at all institutionalized, they've been done for very small portions of time, either faculty recruitment or incentives towards publication, whether they be strong or weak or subtle or direct or whatever. So at least with the National Law School, that set of institutional practices have been less crystallized. So we have relied a lot on sort of the path dependence of the founding faculty team. But I suppose the second different cultural element, and I don't know how strong, I suppose this is very strong at the IIMs and the IITs as well, has been student cultures. What has been remarkable about the National Law School has been its ability to replicate student culture. Now, it's a 5-year program, and so there is a kind of a cultural osmosis across cohorts. But to me, it's remarkably resilient. It's resilient even under changes to other critical parameters of the student, of the university environment. So even when leadership changes, student culture appears to be reasonably resilient. And this is for a relatively young institution to the other institutions being compared, I think this is a very important factor, what sustained culture in an institution like ours. But all of the things that Devang mentioned are things we need to do and we need to learn from. If the university is going to grow and sustain its reputation and do incrementally better, as you put it, we will need to rely on other wheels apart from just student culture and a sort of founding history. And we're probably precisely at that point in an institution's history, roughly 30 years, when founder memories are sort of past. At least they're in a minority insofar as founding faculty even are members of the faculty. And so we have to rely on these other mechanisms to move forward.
Sudhir, I just had a curiosity question. So you studied in the same institution and you mentioned the student culture. Do you remember or can you think of any specific practices or initiatives taken by the student body or the student leadership to reinforce some of those student values you've been talking about?
So let me say a couple of things. I haven't thought through that with the level of detail that your careful question demands, but maybe I'll mention the couple of things that come straight to my mind. I think that the founding faculty did an incredibly good job of emphasizing the quality of publicness to student cultures. The fact that this was an experiment and that it should be publicly spirited and so on. And I think that that kind of ethos building has been sustained. How has it been sustained? I suppose. I mean, I don't have. I wish I could recall one, striking practice where it gets inscribed and reinscribed. I don't think that I can recall such a ritual practice. But I suppose it's been done through minor osmosis. I mean, the hostel cultures, the public cultures of the university. But the other thing I could mention is that one of the striking things about the founding faculty is that they were quite iconoclastic in that they said, we're doing something very different with the National Law University. So we want all of you to be able to question us and question anyone who walks through the halls. And I suppose for an Indian institution, this is not always the case. And so this kind of iconoclastic culture is deeply embedded in the student body. Some might see it as being irreverent and maybe at times brash, but I think it sustains intellectual life in important ways. So I would just pick those two elements for now, the sense of publicness and the sense of iconoclastic kind of almost irreverent approach to intellectual life.
Sure. Thank you, Sudhir. We have limited time. So I'm going to just ask one question to Devang, and then I'm going to take some questions from the audience. So Devang, can you just tell us, as director for 2 terms, what was your biggest challenge in sustaining excellence in IIT Bombay? And how did you address that? And if I may request you to just do that in 2 or 3 minutes, I know that's unreasonable, but so that we can take some questions.
I think that the biggest challenge that I felt was about being able to recruit faculty. And what my strategy was to essentially push this problem to the level of departments, that that I wanted the heads, the younger faculty in particular, through faculty search committees, to actually take the lead in bringing the best people into their department. And I found that was very effective, that once the departments took the initiative and once younger people started telling their friends to come and join, I think that made a big difference.
Okay, good. So I think now we have some time for a few questions, if any. I just looked at the chat window. The only question 2 questions I can see on the chat window. One of them is asking, what are the ways in which we can retain some of the top faculty in India rather than losing them to universities abroad? So maybe Sudhir, any thoughts on that? How do we retain faculty in India rather than losing them to institutions elsewhere?
So the National Law School hasn't. So we're at the cusp, and you ask me in a timely sense. For 10 years, we haven't done a recruitment cycle. So all the things, prescriptions that Devang had, are prescriptions that we have as unticked boxes. And if I succeed with one cycle of recruitment, which is expected to close on Saturday, I might hold out on how it could be done. But I suppose the critical thing, conceptually, to my mind, is that we must ensure that we convey to young people that these are intellectually exciting, vibrant, and open spaces. And if we do that, I don't think, in my mind at least, compensation is important, but not the critical factor. Young people will not come to places that are dead in the water, and whatever compensation we might spin, And so my emphasis would be on trying to communicate and create an intellectually vibrant space. And I hope that young people will come back, and we won't lose them necessarily to university options elsewhere.
Devang, any thoughts on that?
No, I completely agree with what he says, that really money is often, that is one factor, but the kind of environment that you can create in an institution like this is so attractive that, you end up getting some really outstanding people to come and work. And I think that I don't see this as a really big issue that, you know, but really getting the absolutely top people, you have to work at it. And very often, what I have seen, because for 3 years before I became director, I was the Dean of Faculty Affairs at IIT Bombay. So faculty recruitment was, something I did for, I guess, 13 years at a stretch. And one of the things I noticed is that, if the head, the director, tells a young person, we think you're great and we want you to be here, you should join IIT Bombay, this is a great place for you to work, and make them feel welcome. I think very often somebody just hearing that will, they will join.
Okay, so there's another question, Devang, which I think you can take first, and then we'll go to Sudhir. What kind of benchmarks should we adopt for sort of measuring performance or knowing whether we are progressing in the right direction? For example, IITs, should they be benchmarking themselves against MIT, or should they be benchmarking themselves against Stanford, or should you be looking to China? I mean, what would be the benchmarks you think would be most appropriate for our leading institutions? And Sudhir, I'm going to ask you the same question in a moment.
Yeah, no, I think we should benchmark against the best institutions in the world. So, whichever we think are the best institutions, and there are great institutions in China, there are great institutions in the US, UK, and so forth. But what I feel is that it's easy to, put down a rank and then say, okay, you are number 100. But if you put them in classes, I think that the disparities may not be as huge as they appear when you put them in ranks. And certainly, I mean, an institution like MIT for engineering may be in a class of its own. But there are others that are sort of close, and I think we should benchmark with them. There's no...
Sudhir, any thoughts on...
That's where we need to get to. And then, but, we have some parts which are, we have to be sort of granular in that. And some things we may be very good, and some things we may need to do a lot more.
So I've been grappling with ranking questions, and and it seems like we have multiple ranking frameworks even within the government system, whether it be NAC or NIRF, and each one seems to have its own formula and weightage, and just it's been quite a puzzle to just figure this whole thing out. And frankly, I must say that before this, I haven't paid that much attention to rankings. But within the law field, I suppose that we would do well to calibrate to Asian institutions first. The very strong Asian institutions, and even if we were to take ourselves seriously in a regional sense, currently we are completely outclassed, to use Devang's expression. We don't have the capital, we don't have the resources, and to even make that comparison seems to be some kind of act in self-flagellation or something. So we're some way away even from an Asian metric of what is a sound institution. So I suppose we have many puzzles to solve before we really make progress on a global ranking. But let me just say one thing: our credit frameworks, credit rating frameworks show, which is that a lot of our ranking agencies, especially international ones, seem to have consultancy firms that somehow help you boost your rankings, which I've been puzzled by in the short time that I've had to confront this, because it can't be that a consultancy firm can help me improve the quality of my education. They seem to help me improve the quality of my ranking, which suggests that there's something afoot here that all of us should take.
I think the rankings are most useful for students who are looking to, choose a university in a distant land somewhere. But I think for university leaders, the best thing to do about ranking is to completely ignore them and focus on what they think is really important, which is the education part of it. And the rankings will follow automatically. I think, you know, as Sudhir said, they all the ranking systems are disparate because there is no principle behind ranking. And what I think that they do is they have to fix the weights in such a way that, let's say, Oxford or MIT comes at the top. If the day Oxford comes at 100 in a ranking, it's not that Oxford is going to start feeling bad, but nobody will look at that ranking again. So I think that it's a waste of time to look at rankings because they keep changing their parameters.
Yeah, that's true.
And
Okay, so
what a good institution is. So
I
just
think
focus
we,
on that.
according to the time specified by the organizers, we are kind of out of time. So let me attempt to, in a minute or two, try to summarize what we have discussed this evening. So I think we got some glimpse into the importance of founding conditions. That's certainly one thing that Sudhir emphasized quite a bit. One interesting dimension that Sudhir brought in was the importance of student culture in sort of keeping the institute on a trajectory. I particularly liked his reference to the iconoclastic approach of faculty. That sounded somewhat revolutionary. I don't know how many institutions have that. Devang, I think you did point to, again, some very important decisions and approaches taken by different leaders at different points of time. You also emphasized the importance of how change in academic institutions perhaps happens over a longer period of time, not in very short tenures. So it's the cumulative impact of the efforts of several leaders who have identified critical decisions at critical points of time. But one thing which you did emphasize almost throughout is the importance of hiring the best faculty, giving them the right support, but at the same time, not overdoing things like incentives and other forms of motivation, instead sort of embedding that interest in research and excitement in the culture of the institution itself. So that's what I've taken away from all of this. Shuha, should we sort of close now? How does it work?
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all our panelists. This has been an incredibly enlightening session to be a part of, and what a great way to kick off this conference. Of course, the legal fields, the legal and the engineering fields being the two most sought after professional aspirations in our country. I think it's very interesting to see what institution builders from these spaces have to say. So thank you so much. And also thank you, Professor Krishnan, for navigating this whole session so smoothly. I had to do nothing. So thank you. And please stick on for the other sessions that are coming up. We're going to take a very short break for about 4 or 5 minutes. In fact, it's 5:07, so maybe around 3 minutes, and we will start with the next session where our focus is going to be slightly different, and we are going to talk about what we can do as developing countries in terms of institution building. So I'll be back in a few minutes to start off that session.
Hey,
Thank you.
Rishikesha, congrats.
Yes,
What's this? You're becoming director again?
yeah, thank you. I'll talk to you. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
call up sometime. Sudhir, really great to meet you, and hope you can make it to IIT Bombay one of these days.
Yeah, hope to see you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
So thank you so much. We've come to the end of our break for this session. Okay, so it's now time for us to start with the next session. And this session is going to be dedicated to the question, is GER the right parameter for measuring access in developing countries? And if not, then what else can we use? Just to remind you and just to introduce myself to you, to those of you who have just joined, I am Shuha Gangopadhyay. I am a curriculum specialist at Harappa Education, and I am going to be your host for this particular track for all of the 3 days of this conference. And we're now going to kick off the second session for this evening, where we're going to have some fantastic panelists, Dr. Bhushan Patwardhan, who's going to be chairing this panel discussion, and our speakers for this evening are going to be Dr. Pankaj Mittal and Srimati Shailaja Chandra. I want to extend my heartfelt welcome and thanks to all three of our panelists for taking time out in participating in this session. So quickly, I just want to introduce you to our panelists. First, of course, we have Dr. Patwardhan, who is currently the Vice Chairman of the UGC, or the University Grants Commission, and he's a Fellow at the National Academy of Sciences. He's also a Director for the Interdisciplinary School of Health Sciences at Savitribai Phule Pune University, and also holds the post of Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Ayurveda and Integrative Medicine. Dr. Pankaj Mittal is also joining us today. She is the Secretary General of the Association of Indian Universities. She was the first Vice Chancellor of the Bhagat Phool Singh Mahila Vishwavidyalaya. She's also a Fulbright Scholar, and she holds a PhD in Agricultural Statistics from the Indian Agricultural Research Institute. And finally, we have Srimati Shailaja Chandra joining us. She's a member of the Committee for the Evolution of the National Education Policy and has been earlier associated with the National Population Stabilization Fund. She has also worked with the government as a former Chief Secretary at New Delhi, and also former Secretary in the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. If I could have all of you please switch on your mics and switch on your videos so we can start this session.
Hello, this is Dr. Mittal here.
Hello, Dr. Mittal. Dr. Patwardhan, are you here?
Yes, I am here. Hello.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to hand it over to you then, and really looking forward to the session. And just before we start, I also want to mention that we are going to end this particular session with a little Q&A. So whoever has questions, please make sure that you type them in and send them to us through the chat box. And do keep your videos switched on so we can also see who else is joining. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Patwardhan.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks, Ashoka, the whole team, for this wonderful session. And actually, the topic itself is very, very interesting. All of us keep on hearing about GER. Technically, GER is gross enrollment ratio, and all of us think that higher the GER, better will be the country's educational situation, which is true by and large. You will see that most of the developed countries have higher GER, and those are developing which are having lower GER. And GER is also connected with the economy, the GDP and all other markers. But GER as an indicator, whether that indicator is really correct, appropriate for a country like India, that was the question. And the session is based on that. I must tell you that GER actually is universally accepted indicator, which analyzes the enrollments in higher education, and it's a ratio of number of enrollments in higher education to the total population in the age group of 18 to 23. Now there are many questions related to this. Why only this age group? Because now there is a continuing education, lifelong education. So whether age-related or age-linked GR makes sense. High GR indicates high degree of participation, and according to our own data, ASHA data, what we call it as, GR in higher education for India has increased from 19.4 in 2010 to 26.3 as of now. So the GR in higher education for India is lower, definitely, as compared to developed nations, because of the large population of students in the relevant age group are simply not eligible to enroll because they have not successfully completed that 12th. There could be many other reasons, and if you want to really increase GR, the problem is not really in higher education sector, because by increasing or expanding higher education sector, can you really increase GR, or will you have to really strengthen your own school structure, control the school dropouts? These are some of the questions, and there has been one interesting study which has recently been published in Economic and Political Weekly, and Dr. Pankaj Mittal is the first author of that. And my first question to Dr. Pankaj Mittal is, one of the objective of the draft new education policy is to increase GR to at least 50%. And for that to happen, actually enrollments need to be more than 6.8 crores, which means that more than double than the current enrollment. Now, is it possible? Really, is it possible? And whether it is really feasible? Because the completion rate typically in India in 2017, if you see, it was only 42.3%, which means that even if 100% of those completing 12th standard go to higher education, still the limit of the GER cannot be crossed beyond 42.3. So overall this scenario, I would like to really to talk about what is your study and whether GER is really the appropriate indicator for a country like India. Over to Dr. Pankaj Mittal.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot for giving this brief about the GER and EER. And thanks to Dr. Pramod Sinha, Ashoka, and Harappa Education for organizing this mega conference. So when we talk of GER, and when we were studying some data, we were always worrying that why access in India is so low and why India is always, say, in the bottom part of the table whenever the issue of access is discussed. So when we were studying the data, and then we realized that in about 2 years back, the number of students who passed 12th class was about 112 lakhs, out of which 105 lakh entered higher education. When we saw this, we were very surprised that when so many of the students, that almost 90% of the students are entering higher education, why is our gross enrollment ratio low? So then we realized that by definition only, the gross enrollment ratio is people who are enrolled in higher education divided by the number of people in the age group of 18 to 23. Now, when we take the entire age group of 18 to 23, as Dr. Patwardhan has also said, these people are not even eligible to enter higher education because for minimum eligibility for entering into higher education is 12th pass. So when they are not 12th pass, how can they enter into higher education? So we thought of developing a new indicator called eligible enrollment ratio, in which we considered in the denominator only those people in the age group of 18 to 23 who have passed 12th class and hence are eligible to enter into higher education. And when we saw that data, we were really surprised, because the countries like USA, who are having the gross enrollment ratio of 88, as compared to India, which is having a gross enrollment ratio of 27. So when we go to EER, the ratio for them becomes 93, higher of course, but the ratio for India becomes something like 65. That is, the gap has narrowed a lot, because in India, the real problem is at the school level, not at the higher education level, because the number of qualified students themselves are not available. And what more important thing for us was that at many places we were not even able to, for most of the, like we did a study for 10 countries, and those countries we were not able to get the number of students who have passed 12th class in the relevant age group. Therefore, we had to use a term called completion rate, and then through that we calculated ER. One was this 12th class, and second issue which we noticed was that international students, when you see international students, the number of international students in countries like USA, UK is very high, but India, you will be surprised to know that the number of international students in India is only 46,000. So with such a small population of international students in India, and with a large population of international students in USA, their gross enrollment ratio is bound to increase. So we did a second study by sort of subtracting the international students from the enrollment, because they are not forming a part of GR in two sense, because they are not coming from their own country. So then it appeared that the gross ER based on these two, like 12th pass out as well as the minus, if we minus or subtract international students, it was much lower for USA also, as compared to what we really feel that developed countries are really having the good GR. So in our opinion, for the developing countries like India, where the school pass outs are not say 100% or maybe a substantial number, and where the international students are not there, we should define access in an alternate manner. And out of the 10 countries we studied, the highest difference, about 37% difference, that was the difference, 65 to 26, 37% difference was there for India. So therefore, we personally feel that we are not doing a justice if for developing and developed countries we are adopting the same parameter, because we are not on the level playing field. So a level playing field has to be created if we have to compare the access of developing as well as the developed countries. Thank you. Sir, your mic is muted, sir. Please unmute. Sir, we are not able to hear, sir.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Mittal. It was a very lucid explanation and very nice study. Actually, we always are told, no, your GR is low, your GR is low, and therefore nationally also we feel so bad that what is our, so you have now told that we have to consider level playing field. And consider also when we are comparing ourselves, we have to be equal. And that's why EER, what you have talked about, makes a very good sense. And I was surprised, that our EER, if you really see, it goes even near UK, little
more than UK.
More than UK, and that is why the comparison makes real sense. Now, the difference between GR and ER is also very interesting. For developed countries, the difference between GR and ER is very less, even less than 10%. For developing countries, it is more. Now, this difference is very crucial. For India, this difference we found that was highest. And not only that, this is really talking about the relevance of education. So from this point, I am now coming to Dr. Shailaja Chandra. Dr. Shailaja Chandra, you have been a policymaker, you have been in government, you are part of the education policy as well. The GR, as we are going to increase GR, the relevance of our higher education and its employability, these are two very, very crucial points. Otherwise, if you go on just merely increasing GR, what those graduates are going to do, whether that kind of a hollow GR is going to be beneficial for the country, which I think will not be. So the quality of education, relevance of education, and employability are the important factors. So I would like to really ask you that while increasing GR, we all agree that increasing GR is important. We also agree that EER is a better indicator, but then whether GE or EER, the question remains about the quality, relevance, and employability. I would like to ask you that how to deal with this situation. Over to you, Dr. Chan.
Thank you so much. First and foremost, let me thank you for having included me in the panel. You have great faith in my capacity. Thank you. I want to thank Ashoka University and Dr. Pramat Sinha also for this opportunity, because for me it is a chance to voice something from experience, and I'm not going to voice anything which educationists may like or may not like, but more from the point of view of common sense. Where are we headed to? And therefore, when I saw this study, I was amazed that it went to the root of what really higher education should be considering in its totality. You see, GER is a number we chase, and we're so happy with a 1% increase. We're so unhappy with a 1% decrease. Does it really translate into anything at all when so many millions are out of the net and will continue to be out of the net because they will not be able to, for various reasons, complete that benchmark of class 12? This also affects gender, women, because many of them are married early, have childbearing responsibilities, and therefore to pitch something which is unattainable and not admitted is not being very fair to the people who are going to be satisfied that the country is moving forward. There are other ways, and I think your EER idea is excellent. My only concern is, and I'm with you 100%, that it should be considered differently. It should be considered on EER. But having moved, suppose hypothetically one has moved from GER to EER, what does it imply for the political statement you're going to make? By political, I mean in a broader sense. I'm not talking about party politics. I'm talking about the kind of message you're going to give to the world about your attainment. Is it going to be seen as a means of shying away from something you could not achieve, and therefore you have found an easier way of approaching the problem? If that is the accusation, one must be ready with an answer which really goes to the root of what you said, Dr. Patwardhan, which was really about relevance and quality and employability. Second, I do feel that since this subject has come up, ultimately the goal of education everywhere is different. In our country, the goal has somehow or the other been funneled to employment, and we don't have the luxury of just education for its own sake. If employability is the main reason why people look for their university degrees and they look for labels, I do feel that EER will be one way of getting over that terrible, you might say, obsession with having a graduation. And I think that graduation is something which is really quite meaningless today. You have graduates, you have postgraduates who are not even able to get a job of an ordinary unskilled person. They are willing to accept a job even of a peon in an office because they just feel they need a job. Not the content of the job or how they're going to be used does not matter. And therefore, if this can be taken one step further, to be able to do away with the stranglehold of the normal general degree and to pull it right back into what makes eligibility for what. If it can lead to some voluntary, or you might say vocational education, which I'm not talking about carpentry and masonry and things like that. I'm talking about much higher areas like artificial intelligence. If that kind of training, without too much of theoretical content, can become the basis, I think that EER teamed with that could become an absolute game changer. If, however, it is seen only as a means to get away from something unattainable and find another benchmark or parameter, then I think it will be left up in the air. So I think the connection with employability is very important.
Thank you, Dr. Shailaja Chandra. Very, very valid point. So take-home message for us is actually any desperate attempt to increase GR in higher education without improving quality, relevance, and requisite skills might result actually in increased unemployment. So, and also may not allow us to reap expected benefits of the demographic dividend. And there is a need now to really bridge this gap between the blue collar and white collar kind of training. And we should really try to look at the picture in a more holistic way, by which you need not give that kind of a glamour, necessarily that kind of a glamour to a typical degree if it doesn't mean, or if it doesn't translate in something which is more meaningful to people as well as for the country. So this is the message what we got from you, Dr. Shailaja Chandra, very, very well explained. With these two presentations, I think we are completing our first round, and we would be interested to know if the participants have any questions. We would be happy to take them.
I think there is one question, Professor Patwardhan, that's come from Jaipriya, who says, won't it be great if India also moves to the same level as other countries instead of creating a different level playing field for countries like India?
Yeah, actually, we are not creating a different level playing field. We are saying that it should be a same level playing field. And I think for a country like India, we are not going away from the indicator like GER, which is a universal indicator. We are just saying that it is simply not the correct indicator to represent our status. Because if majority of our students who are actually passing 12th are going to college, we have actually reached to a very high level than even UK, which this data shows. So we should not feel shy, we should not feel diffident that we are lagging behind, because this mental state of the sector is also very important. And I think this hammering of GR on our mind that you are too low GR as compared to developed countries, also we need to see whether that is a correct perception or not. And this is what the purpose of this. It is, we are not creating a different indicator for India at all. Whatever indicator we are creating by making everybody on the same level. Thank you.
Just to add to that, sir, it's not the question of creating a different level playing field. Different level playing field is existing. We want that level playing field should be there.
Yes.
Right now, we are not on the same level playing field. We are much lower than the developed countries. So we want to have a similar level playing field, and then we are also saying that GR and ER that should be measured for every country, not only for India. So ER should be a universal parameter rather than saying that for India have something else and for other countries have something else. We are saying that ER should be a universal parameter for every country, which will put every country in the level playing field.
What are your thoughts, Ms. Chandra? Would you like to also add to this question?
No, as I said, I can only develop on what I have already said. But I do feel that there is a class of people which is truly aspirational. They are being denied the opportunity of being able to really reach to their real potential and capability, because they are being benchmarked by a very routine common denominator, which is the degree. I do feel, and I may be saying something which is a little controversial, but I feel that if suppose you did not have that degree in the way we have it today, you have to pass an examination, you have so many papers in the first year, second year, third year, whether you go by semester or any other system. At the end of it, there is a grading based upon an examination. Suppose all that was scrapped and you said that for certain disciplines, it may not work very well in the sciences. It may not work where there is a lot of, you might say, aspiration to say biology or zoology. It may not work there. So I'm not being simplistic, but I'm saying in the pure arts and humanities, if it were possible to merge credits for doing all kinds of activities and all kinds of learning, and it doesn't mean that we go to the other extreme and say that, well, cooking is allowed and swimming is allowed, which is, to earn a credit. It may not really work in a country like India. But suppose there could be allied skilled credits which you could take. At the end of it, an employer would feel satisfied that you have had the exposure which is of relevance to his company or his manufacturing process or his industry. Today, he has absolutely no such conviction. So he looks at the grading of the university. That again is a kind of, you might say, elitist system where it is predetermined that a university with a certain label ranks higher than the university with a lower label. At the end of it, the student suffers and the student is not seen for his own worth of the combination. So I would say that this is the way of being able to turn this on its head. That's all that I want to say. Employability is key. And if one can bring that benchmark to trying to be of relevance to employability and the employer, I think there could be a lot of difference in going the EER way and the GER way. GER will never take you there, whereas EER has the potential to.
Right. We actually have quite a few interesting comments also, that are coming in. So, Melchais, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is saying that employability, especially through campus recruitment, is a priority of ranking HEIs as well as the ranking frameworks. And India can never reach the levels of the Western nations because there the purposes of education is learning. But here the purpose of education is to get a job. So, Dr. Mittal, I want to start with you. What are your thoughts on this? Do you agree? Do you disagree?
It is not, I mean, in India also, we shouldn't say that the sole purpose of education is to get a job. That is not the sole purpose. Through education, you do make a better human being, a better citizen of the country.
Right.
But of course, you cannot even lose sight of employability.
Right.
Because many a times it is said that in India, 78% of the graduates are unemployable. So now that is a serious statement to make, that why are they unemployable? Whether they seek employment or not, that is a different thing, but they should be employable at least in the first instance. I mean, it should not lead to an education which is not even giving them employability. So I feel from that angle it is good. But then I was also seeing another question which says that if we adopt EER in higher education, we will be having a rosy picture, but then the focus from the school education will be removed. Again, to that, I will answer that right now we are discussing the higher education, and we do flag the issues with respect to school education. When we talked of ER, we were flagging the issues with respect to school education. So rather, we are raising a red flag for the school education to tell them that wake up. And because of you, GER is less. Because of you, ER becomes more relevant for developing countries. So if school education becomes better, then the GER will automatically improve. So the focus of school education has to increase. Rather, that is the sole purpose of the study, that the focus on the school education should increase.
Right. What's your thought, Dr. Patwardhan? Because Dheeraj Sanghi, whose comment you just spoke of, Dr. Mittal, has also said that GER also includes older people in education, foreign students, etc. And those are important considerations for higher education. So, Dr. Patwardhan, over to you. What are your thoughts on this?
Actually, we have raised this issue already, because current our GR values, they don't consider, they are not factored for this, and we actually are questioning the age-linked GR. Right. When UNESCO may have defined GR several years ago, that time situation was different. Now we are also telling that there is a time now to redefine GR. Because why it should be linked with only that particular 18 to 23, because there is a lifelong learning. Having said that, I also want to add that GR also assumes that once you are enrolled, you will go to the end. In India, it doesn't happen, because in higher education, there are also dropouts, and in India, we don't have system. We have all or none phenomena, whether you get degree or you get nothing. I think we need to change that also, because there should be certification, diploma. If someone has learned 2 years or 3 years, without giving them any credit, getting them out, like many developed countries, they have such kind of a system, they do get diploma, they get certification, and the new education policy talks about multiple entry, multiple exits, and now UGC is also thinking of coming out with a national academic credit bank, in which students are able to accrue credits and redeem them as and when they need it. So this kind of a student-centric system will also help us to move ahead.
Absolutely. So we're actually running short on time, but I want to take one last question that I would like to hear from all of you from all three of our panelists from. And this question has come in from Dr. Vikas Singh. And he says, as higher education has limited means to motivate students to join schools and finish it, and as EER is already so high, is this the reason why so many private universities have so many vacant seats? We'll start with you, Ms. Srimati Chandra.
I would pass that question. I'm not aware of these things very much. It's better if somebody, I will take it on after I hear Dr. Patwardhan or Dr. Mittal.
And Dr. Mittal, would you like to take this up?
Okay. See, when we talk of vacant seats, you know that many B.Ed colleges were closed and many engineering colleges are also getting closed because they are not getting students just because of the vacant seats. The reason for vacant seats is that the more capacity has been created, and that too capacity in non-quality institutions. So here the quality is the key issue. If the quality seats are there, I don't think in a quality institution even a single vacant seat is there. So the quality is the issue, and more capacity, because we are running after GER. So we are in sort of creating more capacity rather than what we are able to absorb. So that is why the vacant seats are there.
Okay. And Dr. Patwardhan? Would you like
Actually, she has addressed that. So I will also. But the thing is, expansion of higher education is not the way and mean to increase GR. Strengthening school system is the way to GR. This is what is the general message. So what we have done, we have expanded higher education to strengthen GR, and therefore this higher capacity has been increased. Yes, thank you.
Okay. And okay, thank you so much. We're running short on time, and we're actually moving towards a very important keynote now, which I just want to share with all of you. Yes, so the keynote is going to be delivered by Professor Shrikant Datar and he's going to be speaking on enhancing student learning online. Professor Datar is the Senior Associate Dean, University Affairs at Harvard Business School. And the session is going to begin in exactly 5 minutes in track 1. So just to repeat myself, there are three parallel tracks that are taking place right now. You are currently in track 3, but the keynote speech is going to be taking place on track 1. So if I can have Naman put this up. Yes, he's already shared the link to the keynote speech. So please make your way to it. We will have a final session for the day in track 3 after the keynote is over. So I would request all of you who's interested to come and attend the last session, which is going to be on prudent planning, on prudent financial planning for institution building, to please come back. You will be required to input your password once more when you want to come back to track 3. And if you want to move to track 1 or track 2, Naman, if you could share those links as well, you can do that as well. So thank you so much. Special thank you to our panelists. Dr. Patwardhan, thank you so much for navigating this session. Also, Dr. Mittal and Srimati Chandra, thank you so much for taking time out. This was honestly a very, very important conversation for us to have had. And really, really thankful for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks.
So just to repeat myself, if you want to stay on, then you can stay on track 3, but we are not going to have any session just yet. Our next track 3 session is going to begin at about 6:15. So we do have quite some time left, 6:20 in fact. So we do have quite some time left. In the meantime, please join us for the keynote session that Professor is going to be delivering on track 1. Just a quick reminder for those of you who are still here, our keynote speech by Professor Datar is bound to start any minute now. So if you would like to attend that, then please click on the link that Naman has shared on the chat box. And once that's over, please do come back to track 3 or move on to track 1 or track 2 as you would, as you choose. Thank you.
relative
था। अभी बंगले पे भी उसने खाना देना बंद किया था बीच में।
हेलो,
बोला था
is it
पूनम ने
audible?
बोला है खाना देने के लिए बंद किया है। हाँ
Hello and welcome back to track 3. The keynote speech on track 1 is just being wrapped up. It was being delivered by Professor Datar from Harvard Business School, and we're just going to wait for a few more minutes, and the next session on track 3 is going to start at 6:20. So thank you so much for your patience, and we'll be back soon.
आपल्या प्रायव्हेट विद्यापीठावर त्या बेसिसवर त्यांचा करायचा विचार चाललाय का? बरं.
Good evening, and thank you all so much for joining Track 3 back. I really hope you enjoyed that wonderful keynote that was delivered by Professor Datar. I am Shuha Gangopadhyay, for those of you who have just joined new, and I am going to be your host not just today, but for tomorrow and day after as well, for all the sessions that are taking place on Track 3. And it's time for us to now start the final session on Track 3 for today's for today. And today we're going to be discussing prudent planning, sustainable financing for higher education institutes. And this is the session that's happening in Track 3. But if you want to move to any other track, either on Track 1 or Track 2 that currently is hosting sessions on towards student centricity or creating health promoting universities, then you can do that. And Naman, my colleague, is just going to share the links to both of these tracks. And for those of you who are sticking on, welcome. And join me in welcoming our panel for today's discussion. We have Dr. Prashant Bhalla, who's going to be chairing today's session. And our speakers for the session are going to be Dr. Mangesh Karad and Mr. Shankar Vanavarayar. Thank you all so much. If we could have you switch on your mics and your videos, please. I'm also going to quickly take everybody through a short introduction for each of our panelists. First up, of course, is the chair, Dr. Prashant Bhalla. Hello, Dr. Bhalla. Thank you so much for joining. Hi. Dr. Bhalla is the president for the Manav Rachna Educational Institutions, and he's also the chairman at Kunz Kapskolan's Schools. He's the chairman of ASSOCHAM and also the treasurer of EPSI. Our first speaker for this evening is Dr. Mangesh Karad, who's the executive president of MIT Art, Design and Technology University. He's also the trustee and secretary of MAEER. He's the chairman for Western Zone Education Promotion Society for India, or EPSI, and has also formerly been an advisory board member for the Planning Commission. Hello, Dr. Karad. Welcome to the Republic of Letters. And finally, we have Shankar Vanavarayar, who is the chairperson for the Kumaraguru Group of Institutions. He's also the managing trustee for the Vanavarayar Foundation, and he's been the chairman of the CII National Higher Education Committee, and also the former national chairman of Young Indians. Thank you all so much. Thank you to all our panelists, our speakers, and our chair for joining us. And it's been absolutely wonderful so far having all of you join us. And this is only going to be better and better with each session. Just a quick reminder, we are going to be ending this current session with a short Q&A with our speakers. So please don't forget to put in whatever questions you may have for them in our chat box that you'll find in the Zoom screen below. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Bhalla.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Good evening and a warm welcome to my fellow panelists who are here today, Mr. Mangesh Karad and Mr. Shankar. Mr. Mangesh is our friend, and he's part of EPSI also, and same with Shankar. And I think today's topic, if I talk about prudent planning, sustainable financing for higher educational institutions, it's really apt in today's environment which we are seeing in the current scenario that we all are going through, this pandemic that has hit us. I think it's even become more and more relevant and more important for us to really understand it deeply in terms of how things used to happen and what change really this has brought in. If I talk about the institutions, they really have to be, developed as world-class institutions. I think it's possible if all the stakeholders, whether the students, faculty, parents, alumni, everybody really comes in, and in addition to the relevant government agencies and departments, obviously their support is always needed. But I think it's all about a collaborative effort, and we have to look at alumni support coming in, potential donors, local communities who have to pitch in. So I think it's all about an effort that has to be a jointly driven effort by all. And that's what is definitely going to lead towards sustainability if we really talk about in today's times. If I talk about certain key aspects that we've been seeing building, there's more and more pressure than ever to deliver. And that's what is coming from the environment, from the student community, and they really want value for money. They expect a significant return on investment on their tuition fees in terms of quality, the facilities, employability. And even if we talk about the new education policy that's been on the anvil for quite some time now, it also talks about lots of free ships to be given in terms of financial support that is sort of going to be mandatory now. Obviously, all the institutions have their own policies, but I think the government expects that at least 50% of the students get some support or the other. So we have seen the changing demands on the estates in terms of IT infrastructure. As you see, this current challenge that has come to us in terms of changes in the requirement of libraries or classrooms. They've moved into more of collaboration spaces and smaller workstations where the peer learning should happen more. In terms of other aspect of social learning, I would say that is again a key aspect that is building on in terms of expectations from the students and from the environment. The role of higher education institutions, as well as even K-12, if you talk about, the requirement is changing in terms of the life skills component or the expectations from the student community to be really evolved or developed as per the environment needs or as per the community needs. And we need to really define their social expectations also in a right way. So if I talk about some studies that have happened in the past in US and other countries, there again, the personal and social responsibility, the moral formation and service leading and responsible judgment have been the key aspects that everybody feels that have to be really integrated well in our scheme of delivering of things. The other aspect is engagement with the local communities. I think that again is something that, if you see, has been evolved well in other parts of the world, and UK is one example. I think if we talk about how they have created this engagement and what way they have delivered. If you look at the figures, the UK higher education institutions generated 95 billion in 2017. That is approximately an increase of I think 35 billion pounds since 2010. The social and economic implications of upholding the relationship between institutions and local communities has increased a lot, and its importance has increased a lot. And it really presents a very good opportunity for university, colleges, and business schools to influence the societal progress, I would say. The other bit, if I talk about a big issue or a challenge that we've been seeing in terms of attracting and retaining high caliber staff and students, I think that's again an important aspect to create a community for your own institution. And this can be a product of engagement and integration of both students and staff. I think one way we can really build it well by the use of extracurricular activities, programs to be imbibed more. And I think with the onset of new public management, there is a shift in methods of financing of higher education institutions across the countries of the world, particularly the emerging market economies. If I see from public financing to private financing of higher education. There's been a report on investing in education for changing world by the International Commission on Financing Global Education Opportunity that states that for creating the learning generation, there's a need of $3 trillion annual education spending in low and middle income countries by 2030, compared to the current level of $1.2 trillion. That is a 2016 report, due to the rapid expansion of enrollment in education. So I think what we are seeing is a shift in the kind of practices that we used to have traditionally, and it is a global phenomenon, and more so in our country, we have different ways in which the institutions really evolved. And unfortunately, we as a country have been having some categorization also in terms of some being under an affiliated structure, some operating as autonomous institutions, some operating as deemed universities, some operating as state universities. The new education policy now talks about really demarcating and having clear-cut definition of three sets of institutions. So hopefully, I think that is also something relevant to our context and in terms of how we see the institutions and how they are really presented. So I think with these opening remarks, I would now request other speakers, Mr. Mangesh Karar, if he can throw some light on what way I think his institutions have evolved. And we've seen Maharashtra is one state that is one of the most progressive states in terms of how education has evolved in that part of our country. So over to you, Mr. Mangesh Karar. Thank you.
Webinar. Oh, sorry. Sorry, my mic was mute, so I could not talk. Thank you, Dr. Prashant Barlaji, Chairman for today's webinar, my session. Yeah, it is a very interesting topic, sustainable financing for the higher education in India. It is a really very interesting topic because I have seen both the sides of the financing, financing for institutions, perspective of institution owners and financing of the students. Both sides are very important. As you rightly said, in India, Maharashtra was the second state with all private self-financing institutions. And I still remember in initial days, Maharashtra had adopted the policy of around 20% management quota or institutional level quota. 50% seats were given to the institutions, and all the institutions, they were authorized to do their admissions, and there were no issues at all. The process was so simple. People used to apply to the institutions. The fees were decided by the government. That time, average fees was there. No complexities were there. But still, the system was running very well. And we know after 93, number of court cases, they came up, and everything, the centralized admission process got evolved. Then the paid fee structure, then the free seat structure. Number of schemes got evolved by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has ruled the education sector throughout the last 30 years, and they have really made the financing of the institution very complicated because the Constitution of India comes into the picture. If you cross-subsidize the education, then it is not allowed. Otherwise, initially 20% of the seats were, they were doing the subsidizing of the other 80% of the students. But now that everything has stopped, and now it is, and over the years, if I talk about the Maharashtra, now the situation of Maharashtra institutions is very bad. This year in the COVID pandemic also, in Maharashtra, more than 50% seats are filled. They are sponsored by the government of Maharashtra, either scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, OBC. Now the Prime Minister has declared EBC seats. So altogether it is more than 50%, almost 60% seats are partially sponsored by the government of Maharashtra or fully sponsored by the government of Maharashtra. So everyone, the cash flow has really got disturbed. So my first point is that government should really make the laws or the policies very transparent policies. They have to take into confidence the institution owners, the management of the institutions before declaring any policy. Because once they declare the policy, they cannot withdraw that policy. Reimbursing, they used to reimburse the fees of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe students in the old days prior to 2007-8 in Maharashtra. But now they have said no fees are to be paid. Government will give the fees directly to the institutions. But they are not giving for 5 years, 7 years. Now still, my outstanding with the government is of almost 50 crore rupees from 2010-11. So there is no meaning. And on the other hand, the policies, how the government, the system is working against institution. there are fee committees as per the Supreme Court decision. They are not allowing the interest paid on the loans taken, overdraft taken by the institutions for adjusting or to bridge up the gap, cash flow gap. So they are not allowing. They are saying it is not allowed. You have to bear it. How standalone institution can bear that load of the interest? So everyone is working in their silo. The fee committees, the appointed chartered accountants, appointed other experts, they are not considering both the sides. They are not giving natural justice. So I think we have to really make the policies very clear. Government has to be very specific what is to be accounted, what is to be calculated in the calculation of the fee, how much surplus has to be calculated, some surplus has to be given. So, but the government has become dumb, dumb because there are political issues. These are the social issues. So this is the biggest trouble on the policy level, I will say. The policies are not clear and they are not implemented with the right spirit. Even the Supreme Court judgments are also not implemented in the right spirit. So institutions are really in bad stage in Maharashtra. I do not know about other states, how much part is sponsored in the other state by the government. But the situation may be similar to Maharashtra. So this is about the institutions, financing. And the other part, if any businessman goes for the business of creating infrastructure, like constructing highway or constructing port, the banks, they give them the loan for 15-year period or for the 20-year period. So it will be so government has to consider education sector as an infrastructure sector. They have to give the loan repayment period of a 15-year or 20-year, so that institution cannot, institution can raise the finances and they can repay the finances without raising much tuition fees. So that will be really sustainable model for financing of the higher education institution. So that is our other word part, the other part of the financing of the institution for creation of the infrastructure. As on today, maximum period given is only 7 years. So that is really hampering the institution's finance, and they are compelled to charge more fees, and which is not tenable, or which is not. Sometimes you also feel so much fees is not good to charge to our student community. So this policy change government has to make, RBI has to make. So that is on the other part. About financing of the students, I will say, I will not talk. Prashantji has really given the overview of the global level, how the things are happening in different countries. I will only talk about India. I just gone through the procedure of what is practiced in India. In India, they have said they can finance 100% of the education loan, and currently for loan up to 4 lakh rupees, there is no margin money required. And for studies in India, 5% of the required money has to be financed by the applicant. Above 4 lakh, above 4 lakh, if you want to have the loan, I think you need a collateral bank guarantee from your parents. But my real question is that banks, they do not give loans. They are very reluctant to give the loans to the students, even up to 4 lakh rupees or above 4 lakh rupees also. They do not process the loan application so easily. So we have to create that culture. Government has to really very strict. They have to give the most priority for loans to our student community. So this is the other important aspect. The government and the bank has to change the mindset. Without that, I think the loan availability of loan will not be possible. The other point which I have come to know recently, in some of states, they have made it mandatory if they want, the government, the loan from their banks, like Bihar. Bihar has made one facility by which they are financing.
Sir, can we cut it short because we have limitation of time, please?
Yeah, surely. I am summing up. So every state has a different policy. So ranking should not be mandatory for taking loans for the education for the students. So that has to be at least for initially 5 years, 6 years, the ranking should not be compulsory. So this is in a nutshell. I am concluding my small speech. We have to create the culture by which the loans, education loans to our students shall be given at very easily. And for education, education institutions, it shall be treated as an infrastructure loan so that they can repay the loans in the period of 15 years or 20 years. So these are the 2 points I want to give. Thank you, Prashant.
Thank you, Mr. Karad. Now I request Shankar if he can come in and share his views.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prashant. And it's a wonderful evening that we're all sitting here in this extraordinary event, which is bringing together a wide range of topics and wonderful people to talk. In a time where, to be honest, we're all as if we're living as if there is a pause button on the planet. It is very important, and I'm not sure how much Ashoka and Harappa had thought about this as Groundbreak 2020, because all of us, the public joke on the fact of 2020 and what it is. And Groundbreak, maybe it's going to be a fresh start. I'm just going to touch about a little about the past on why we are here and some of the things that Professor Karad had also touched upon and Dr. Prashant spoke about. The fact that our system is a fallout of a colonial system, but then the independent India took a socialist path, and rightfully so, because public funded education was essential for a nation which was coming out of its sort of dark past, and it needed to be there. But if you look at the last 30 years, so much has changed. So much has changed in the number of students and the percentage of how much private education has sort of added to the country's value is enormous. At the same time, we also have to understand India is a case like none other. While I was just imagining India as a large nation, diverse cultures, extraordinary amount of languages, the rural-urban divide is like none other. And our demographic dividend, also a great advantage for education, but it also stresses the system on the numbers. If we have to work on a huge number, we are at about close to 30%. And if we have to go like Europe to about 60 or 70%, the need is enormous. At the same time, our population is high. The economic demand of education value that young people have to add to economy is very high. And in these times, it's even more. So all this brings to us an enormous challenge, but also a fantastic opportunity. Our regulators have for long worked on guaranteed needs, on minimum requirement. But I think maybe this pause, thanks to COVID, is reminding us that the Indian scenario has to be very different. And why do I talk about this, the Indian scenario? Because I'm not sure if this country can afford to build 30,000 more or 10,000 more colleges and hundreds of universities even more. I think the virtual reality possibility, blended learning opportunity clearly brings about a certain need. Now, with all this, what happens to what we are, who we are? Because the pause hit education like none other, because education as a whole scope was built on brick and mortar in India, was built on the physicality. Our teachers were trained and are specialists in classroom management, in delivery of knowledge, and our students require a lot of mentoring. Now there seems to be a huge shift in all this, which also is going to require a huge amount of investment. So my thesis is that there has to be a relook at what public investment in education is. Are we supporting only fee, or are we going to support, say, for instance, research in a lot of institutions? Because our institutions have to become centers of knowledge and ideation. And also, do we have to create infrastructure for a lot more facilities for young people to learn differentially? And as private education, and I think three of us in the panel represent some of the best institutions in the country, and I think it's very important for us to understand that what is critical for private education is to understand the new tomorrow, the expectations. As beautifully Dr. Prashant said, the expectation of the student, everything is changing. What was 30 years ago or 20 years ago, today the student, the parent, the industry, society, the expectations are enormous. So we also have to think of a public funded, privately financed, but also income generating model, which has to be a blended model. And in the fact that the shift has been enormous between private and public, today 38% of the universities are private, 62% of the universities are public. Even in that, there are a lot of privately aided institutions. But what is very interesting is 84% of the colleges in the country are private today. So the enrollment numbers are enormous, and the value we add. So which also means this model has to be rethought about completely. And this calls for a mindset change for the regulator to now play facilitator or a quality enabler. Because the regulator model will not work in a country which has such a large ecosystem. And we are the only very unique nations which has an affiliated system. An affiliated system where there are universities sort of affiliating institutions. So maybe there has to be a lot more localization, a lot more innovation and inclusivity in things. As much as I also think there has to be funding, because India is still a developing nation and huge amounts of our population need support. So we have to find interesting ways. I have some thoughts which I can clearly share later. I will talk about it in a while. But in the COVID era, I think Winston Churchill, I think once said, never let a crisis go waste. So here is a time that this pause will allow us to rethink the model, rethink the financing model, but sustainability has to be thought about in a very different way on how education in India, private or public, can be built further. So these were my sort of initial thoughts, but Dr. Prashant, I think we should take it forward in our conversation, and I'm looking forward to more. Thank you.
Thanks, Shankar. Thanks, Mangesh. I think broadly, we all were talking on these lines that we as private players who have been in this environment for quite some time have been through the different kind of challenges and the problems that we have also faced, and maybe some still continue, as Mr. Karad was mentioning. But I think really a new model has to emerge, and some new thought has to go in that, where really government has to come in. And I think the new education policy, I personally feel, really gives us that kind of direction, in a sense that it is drafted well. Maybe some work needs to be done in the current context of COVID-19, where we see that some expectations are changing in terms of how it lays the expectations versus what the current requirements might be, considering that we have gone through one big transformation. So I think in terms of one aspect of education loans that somebody pointed out, that this is something that is a concern. You get loans if you have support in your family, but I think for students who really need them, they are the ones who are denied that. I think that is one aspect that was raised, and we have been discussing this at various forums, and that's the reason I think the new education policy also talks about 50% of the students being given free ships, and even the research promotion, the foundation that has been discussed, I think that is also something that is being talked about in the education policy, that is going to give impetus to the research. But I think if I talk about education loans, that is, I think as Shankar pointed out, and even Mangeshji also pointed out, there has to be shift in mindset of the people who are at the helm of affairs, whether it is the financial institutions or other HRD officials and all that, that in the end, it is the student community that is getting loaded, because if the prime source of revenue for institutions is fees, so any such regulation which really impacts the cost will go on to the students. So if you look at the previous challenge of GST that we all faced, like when GST came, it really increased the bottom line of our expenditure. Some exemptions got withdrawn. There was a hit that we got, since we have to pay on those outsourced services up to an extent of 18%. So eventually, it is impacting the bottom line, and the source of revenue remains the same. So somewhere we have to come up with solutions which are like contextualized as per our country's requirements, I would say, which needs to be thought of. Maybe we have different systems. Government pays for tuition in many countries, for schools, for higher education. In our context, some states have come up with some solutions. Like if we talk about Andhra, there are scholarships for students belonging to a particular category or based on their income profile. So I think there's some examples. If we can look at those examples from coming from different states, and if government can really look at easing up some possibilities. Like if I share one example I saw in the state of Haryana, like in this COVID times, the state of Haryana has owned up the interest burden of education loans for these 3 months of the students that are studying in the state of Haryana. So that is one good practice we saw that gave support to the students and really helped them in these troubled times. So I think similar kind of practices can be thought of. There is a higher education agency has been formed for financing, though currently the purpose is more for infrastructure development for central institutions. Maybe we can think about a scheme of the same magnitude as we have the Ayushman Bharat scheme or something like that for education. I think this is something that is food for thought, that some new work has to happen in this direction, and that can lead a way towards the new future that we are talking about.
Yeah, Prashantji, I totally agree with your point. Government of India should not spend more money on the infrastructure. They are going to, erect so many institutions. Rather than that, if they finance the needy students, meritorious students in existing institutions, that will really utilize the infrastructure which is already created by so many institutions throughout the country. But government, that mindset has to be changed. Every prime minister or every minister would like to, set up number of institutions in their tenure. So we have to do the lobbying for that. And that much money, if they can utilize for financing or taking the burden of the interest, so that will be much better solution. I think that's what we can do.
Thank you, Dr. Karad. We are actually unfortunately running out of time, so I'm just going to quickly call for final thoughts from each of you. We'll start with you, Dr. Bhalla.
I think it has been a really interesting session, and in the end, if we look at whatever we have seen in the past and even the new education policy when we talk about, so everything is linked to the financing. And I saw one question in the chat box. There was a question around what are the other means of financing. So I think I touched it briefly that you have to look at alumni, you have to look at community. And obviously, as we were discussing in the end, the government has to come in a big way in terms of being an enabler. The new education policy talks about a regime which is light and tight. So hopefully that should be the thing that we should see forthcoming in the near future. But primarily, finance is something that is the right area to look at. Research is definitely one, I would say. But as Mangeshji also pointed out, maybe we have been focusing too much of infrastructure spending, looking at new infrastructure setups being built and new IIMs, IITs getting evolved. If you look at the spending that government is doing to the top institutions, I think we have some statistics. Nearly 95% of it goes to a very minuscule percentage of 3 to 5% of the population of the country. So maybe we should see how we make broad-based, how we see that our expenditure or our spend goes to the masses, to the people who are really contributing. And they are the ones who are in private educational institutions. Maybe nearly 85% of the overall education, I would say higher education definitely is in the hands of private players. And if they are supported well by giving research grants, by giving some concessions in the regulatory framework in terms of the ease of loans or lesser interest rates on the education loans, all these things are going to really help a lot. So these would be my remarks. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bhalla. Mr. Vanavariyar, I'll come to you next. Your final thoughts on this session.
Thank you so much. So it's, I guess it's been a short session for a topic that can only take years to figure out and many decades that we are figuring out. But I just think there is ownership on all sides of the spectrum. I think institutions have to find intelligent ways to focus on core and outsource unnecessary work, and we have to get prudent and agile in managing finances, use more technology and find other ways. Regulators have to become facilitators, and they really have to support where they can, invest on public infrastructure like connectivity and so many other things. Very important that institutions should also be allowed to multi-use, to parallel use, to part-time use, so that part-time students, parallel learning, industry usage, so many other things. Our campuses, if space utilization is very weak. So I think we have to think of very interesting ways of bringing in this. And there has to be a tripartite from society, industry, like Dr. Prashant said. There are so many things that India has to do because our challenges, our resources are meager, our population is large, and outcomes have to be phenomenal. So with all this, I personally feel a sustained way has to be something that is inclusive, uses innovation, but certainly impact in a very different way. The whole 4-year, 3-year model of full-time is certainly not the way forward. So I think there has to be also structural format ways that we have to think along with sustainable practices that we have to follow.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Banavaria. Professor Karad, I'll come to you finally for your thoughts just before we wrap up and move on to the keynote.
Yeah, can I talk?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I want to say in summing up, we really need very clear and stable policy by the government, by the state governments as well as by the government of India. When I say government of India, the regulators, they go on changing their norms every year. And because of very heavy norms, they have to be really facilitator rather than the controller. They do not believe in the institution management, and they keep adding the norms every year. That is really burdening institutions at large. So if we really work in a team, we have to believe each other. And if we make a clear policies, non-changeable policies, at least for 5 years, then I think the institution can sustain, financing can be sustained, they can plan the things, and they can, the higher education will be more sustainable for institution owners as well as for the student community. So this is my view in a nutshell. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I want to thank each and every one of our panelists for taking their time out and really talking about the nitty-gritties of what it really means to build an institution and the kind of intelligent and prudent financial planning that we all need to think about when it comes to education, because it's so important. We can't really progress in the field of education in building institutions in this country without the money and the resources. So thank you so much for taking us through your perspectives and your experiences. I also want to thank everybody else who has joined us, not just for this session, but all of today. This marks the end of day 1, track 3 for the Republic of Letters Groundbreak 2020. We are now going to quickly move into the final keynote speech for today, which is going to be delivered by Dr. Pardis Madhavi. She's the Dean of Social Sciences and the Director of the School of Social Transformation at Arizona State University. And her session is going to start in 3 minutes at 7 p.m. And many of you may realize that, again, as the other keynote speeches have been today, it's going to take place on track 1. So, Naman, if you could please share the link to the keynote speech, you could make your way to it. And before you all leave and before I also say goodbye to you, I also want to quickly take you through what we have on offer for you tomorrow. We have 3 keynote speeches tomorrow being delivered by Dr. Anil Shastrabudhe, who's the chairman of AICTE, followed by Professor Bharat Anand, who's the vice provost of advances in learning at Harvard University. And finally, Mr. Ben Nelson, who's the CEO of Minerva Project. With that, I want to wrap up today's session. Thank you all so much. We really hope you enjoyed yourself and had as much fun as we did hosting you and attending these sessions and organizing these sessions. I will see you all hopefully tomorrow at 4 p.m. Thank you so much and have a great evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
I can see that many of you are still here. Please make your way to the keynote speech, which is about to begin in, any second now. The link, Naman, my colleague, has already shared on the chat box, and we hope you enjoy the session. It's going to take place on track 3, the link for which is going to be in the chat box. Thank you.
ಇಲ್ಲ ಮಾತಾಡ ಲೈವ್ ಇದೆ.
ಮತ್ತೆ ಈ ಲೈವ್ ಈ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾನ ಕೇಳ್ತಿ
ನಾನದ ಇಲ್ಲ